Okay, so I saw this floating around on my YouTube stream, and I figured I was going to take a break from some other stuff, and I wanted to watch it. This is Bernardo Kastrup on Sean Carroll, Illusionism, and more. Looks like it's on some channel called Monistic Idealism. Um, so I've talked to Bernardo a couple times for Consciousness Live. I've had him on solo time, and then also a couple times with Philip Goff talking about the difference between panpsychism and illusionism. So I find that stuff all very interesting. But in this discussion here, um, let's see if I rearrange this. So Bupe, here's the discussion. It looks like they're talking about illusionism and panpsychism and all sorts of things that are up in my area of liking. So let's go ahead then. I figured I may as well record this. Whoops, what did I just do? Okay, so make me smaller. I'm shrinking. Oh no. And I'm also over there. Okay, so I'm just gonna be down here. Should I be over here? I'll be over here. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Okay, so let's go ahead and listen to this. So they're gonna says, I listened to the asking why part. I'm gonna skip ahead to the meta problem of consciousness, which is where this
Yeah,
is.
so we're going to be jumping into philosophy of mind now, specifically towards opinions on the meta problem. So the meta problem in consciousness lately is for those who see it as there is really no hard problem. Um, so I think you've mentioned this online before that maybe you don't see it as a hard problem. So basically what people would say if there's no hard problem, they say it's
Wait a minute, wait a minute. Okay, so this is off to a strange start here. So that's not how I understand things, but maybe I'm jumping the gun and I should let them talk. So the meta problem is it comes from David Chalmers, and it's supposed to first of all you have to have the hard problem, which is the question of why does any particular conscious experience have the physical basis that it does as opposed to some other, um, and why does that physical basis the basis of that conscious experience as opposed to that one or none at all. Um, so the meta problem is a question of why we think there's a hard problem. So David Chalmers coined this term, and he thinks there's a hard problem. He coined that term too. So he thinks there's a hard problem and a meta problem. The meta problem is explaining why people think there's a hard problem. Now, it is true that people who deny there's a hard problem might still think there's a meta problem, and they might think that's all you need to do is explain the meta problem. In fact, I think that might be Michael Graziano's view, and I'm going to be talking to him on Monday, coming up here on the 22nd. So, but the meta problem is not one that you would only think exists if you denied the hard problem. On the other hand, the meta problem is amongst the easy problems as defined by David Chalmers, since the easy problems, according to him, are the problems of explaining how it is that we acquire information, store information, use that information to guide behavior, so memory and all of these sorts of things, which we sort of know how to provide at least the beginnings of a theoretical understanding of. But the hard problem is this other thing about consciousness, which seems like it doesn't have anything to do with structure and function. Um, anyway, okay, so I think maybe they're using it in a different way, or maybe they're trying to just pick on the people who think that all you need to do is explain the meta problem, and then you would have explained everything that you need to explain. Let's see
and
what they take
the
this.
meta problem is a series of easy problems, and if you answer those easy problems will dissolve the hard problem. So
Okay, so some people do think that, but that's not definitive of the meta problem. The meta problem is an easy problem, and some people think that explaining that solving that will dissolve the hard problem. Other people don't think that. Um, okay, I don't know who this guy is, by the
This is
way.
a tricky one. There is a real meta problem in the sense that, curiously, there is a minority of people who do understand what physicalism is and entails and what idealism is and entails. They do understand all that, and yet they do not recognize the hard problem. The hard problem is the following: there is nothing
Wait, what did he say? They don't recognize. I'm gonna rewind that for a sec. Just let me.
of people who do understand what physicalism is and entails and what idealism is and entails. They do understand all that, and yet they do not recognize the hard problem.
Okay, so he must be talking about the people who I was just mentioning, the ones who want to think that, and like this interviewer also mentioned, the ones who want to only explain away the meta problem and then think that somehow dissolves the hard problem. Okay.
Hard problem is the following: there is nothing about physical parameters or properties in terms of which we could deduce the qualities of experience in principle. In practice, we can deduce those qualities just by looking at the correlations between brain activity and experience. We don't understand how one leads to the other and if it does that at all. But if we see enough correlations, we start being able to deduce the link between the two in practice. But
Yeah, so for example, if someone's looking at a face, we can tell which part of the brain should be more active, the fusiform face area, etc. So we have some rudimentary ability, but that was learned from experience. Um, I mean, I guess I see what he's saying, but I'm always suspicious of this way of presenting the hard problem, because he's putting it in terms of fundamental physics. Let me let him finish with this, and then I'll say what I'm suspicious about.
in principle, there is nothing about mass, charge, spin, momentum, geometrical
Exactly,
relationships,
fundamental
frequencies,
physics.
and amplitudes, in terms of which we could logically deduce that those amplitudes and frequencies correspond to the color blue or to the feeling of heart.
All right, so hold on a second here. I'm gonna take over the screen here. Hey, for 1 second now. Wait a second. So this is something that has always bothered me about these kinds of things. That people who set it up this way. There's nothing about the physical description in terms of fundamental particles, which would allow us to deduce that there is conscious experience or that red is this physical set of parameters, whatever. Of course, I think that you could make the same claim about water and H2O if you didn't have a theory of chemistry. So if you didn't know about chemistry at all, then just looking at the interactions of microparticles isn't going to lead you to a theory of chemistry, let alone to their being H2O. So that comes from a different higher level theory. And in order to make sense of how that level relates to the lower level, took a lot of work. And some people would argue isn't still fully worked out and blah, blah, blah. But I think you can make a pretty decent case that some of it's worked out. So why not think the same thing in the place of consciousness? What we need is a theory that'll help us make sense of all the data that, all the stuff that brain is doing. In the same way that we need the chemistry, a theoretical standpoint, to make sense of certain fundamental particles doing various high level things. So I think that the correct place to look for a theory of consciousness is at the psychological level, because consciousness is a psychological phenomenon. So I would say that, yeah, of course, you're not going to get it from just looking at physics. You've got to look at psychology. And if you had a completed theory of psychology, then you would be able to, I would say, or a physicalist like me, who's someone who's friendly to physicalism like me, would say, that might be a different story. So the second thing is to say, well, maybe you can't deduce it, and then, but that doesn't really show that physicalism is false. And I would be someone who would defend the existence of brute identities, even though people there are some people are skeptical of those things. I don't think there's much reason to be skeptical, except for on days where I am skeptical, in which case it's a different story. Okay, I'm shrinking back down to down here, and we're gonna let Bernardo finish. Even though disagree with this way of putting it. I know what he's trying to say. What he's saying is that that it's commonly assumed that there's no deductive link between the physical basis for consciousness and the experiential qualities of it. Okay, good.
break. The bridge is logically arbitrary, and there is a reason for that I can elaborate on later if you guys ask. But that's the hard problem. Now, curiously, some people do not see it. Some people who do understand the things involved do not see the hard problem. And that's curious. It's like a blind spot in one's mind that is very curious. Now, I think most of the
I don't know who he's talking about here who doesn't see the hard problem. You know, there always have been some small minority of people who, you know, Chalmers originally classified as the type A materialist, the analytical behaviorists were the prime example, who thought, gee, all you had to do was explain, you know, how the internal states are related to behavior or something like that, and then you're done. And maybe there's a subset of people, like maybe it's illusionism that he really has in mind here, but you know, but I think the most popular view amongst philosophers here is something like either type B physicalism, which asserts the mind, the kind of brute identity thing, which is maybe why they're going to talk about phenomenal concept strategies here, which is sometimes, you know, popular amongst that group. But uh, so, yeah, that's the type B strategy. I lost track. I was thinking about the phenomenal concept strategy, you know, but um, the most popular view would be something along those lines, I would say, uh, where it's not deducible from a priori from any set of physical facts, anything about consciousness, but that still doesn't show that consciousness is itself not physical according to the type B approach. And then probably, so when I was young, probably type C materialism, which was this, well, we don't know, it's one or the other of these other approaches. I have some tendency towards that wait and see kind of approach. But the point I'm trying to make and I'm rambling about is that this idea that you have to deduce the consciousness facts from some physical facts is a very Chalmers inspired way of presenting the problem, and it's one that many philosophical in philosophically informed physicalists are skeptical of, even though I myself endorse on some days a version of physicalism on which you can make those a priori deductions as long as you have the right concepts. Okay, so I'll stop rambling and let him ramble.
people that do not see the hard problem do not see it because they actually don't understand what physicalism implies and entails. They just do not understand what the hard problem is. So they don't see it because they don't understand it. That's not a meta problem. That's just short-sightedness. That's just ignorance. It's not a meta problem. There is a meta problem, but I think it's much less widespread than people think. Let me give you an example. A lot of educated people out there who are not philosophers and haven't spent time thinking about this, they make the following assumptions, or they have the following unexamined understanding of physicalism. They think that according to physicalism, our thoughts and our emotions are in here, inside our heads. But that the colors we see, the flavors we taste, the melodies we hear, they are really out there, according to materialism. Perceptual experience and its qualities is really
Well, now hold on. So I don't know who he's talking about, but I'll tell you just from like teaching classes on this topic that many people are take this view, not just the materialist or physicalist, but I think it's the kind of common sense view. I remember that I took this view when I was a youngster, thought it was obvious that the colors were out there. I probably wasn't a physicalist back then before all these philosophical machinations forced me to think through all these issues. But I thought it was just obvious that the colors were out there. And when I remember the day I was in my philosophy class, and it just offhandedly, not even related to the point, it was something about ethics. I think we were talking about error theory or something, it must be. It was like talking about how red light isn't really red, but it's just the type of light that produces red experiences in us. And I was sitting in the classroom, and I was just like, what are you talking about? What do you mean red? And I rose my hand. My hand arose, and I was like, excuse me, what do you mean red light is not red? And he was like, yeah. So gave me the argument, and, that's not the minority view. So that was my kind of realization that the science slash philosophy, or at least the pseudo scientifically informed philosophy of a certain period of time, took this as kind of established that the redness of red is a mental quality, and not something that exists in the external environment. Now, of course, I mean, I don't want to extend this too long because this is already 4 hour video I'm trying to watch. But my own view is that these words are ambiguous as between a property in the external environment that we can sense and perceive, redness of the apple, and the redness of the experience, the thing that the apple produces in us by which we come to experience the redness of the apple. So I never understood these people who want to the debate about which is the primary one or which one gets thrown away. I think they're both perfectly good words, meaning the word words like red. There's a red that applies to the object, and a red that applies to whatever it is that allows me to appropriately interact with the object. So we have to be careful about which one we're speaking of. So now the experience of red is in here, obviously. And a lot of the confusion, I would say, sort of following, this is what someone like David Rosenthal would call the relocation story. So if you follow the story of modern philosophy from like Hume and Locke and so forth, from Descartes through Hume and Locke and Kant and so forth into our contemporary period, what you tend to think is that, gee, people are thinking of the red out there in the same way as they think of the red of the experience. And the redness of red out there is probably just some physical property. So it's not red like the way I experience things. And that's how you preserve both. So there is a perfectly good use of the word red that applies to something which is external to me, and which also has the power to produce in me red experiences. David Chalmers calls the naive view the view that the redness is out there, a view where we live in Eden, a possible world where the colors really are external to the mind and coat the surface of objects around us. And science and philosophy seem to suggest that that's not the way the external world is, although there are a view, there are people, namely around Berkeley, who think that this is still the case, the so-called naive realism, quote unquote naive realism, that the colors really are out there. Whether they're physicalists or not, I don't know, but there are. I don't see why it would be something that would conflict with physicalism in some sense, logically speaking, whether it conflicts with our like physical world as we know it, because red's a primitive and there's nothing primitive in the physical world. Okay, I'm getting very distracted here, but the point here, what is he? What would you anticipate his point to be here based on what he's saying? What I'm thinking he's trying to say is that naively many people think of the redness as out there, but according to the view that many people accept, the redness is a property of the experience in some sense, and so is not out there. Okay. That may cause some people naively who thought that they were physicalists to rethink their view and to become not physicalists. That might happen. My own view is that once I realized this, I sort of just realized, I started to think about, well, gee, that's pretty interesting that the redness of red is a property of the brain. And that there's a different property in the external environment, but I don't think that that's a reason for rejecting physicalism. But we'll see where he's going to go with this.
They are according to materialism. They think. And it's only thoughts and emotions and endogenous experiences that are in here. Well, no, it's not materialism. Materialism would also say the colors you see are not out there. They are in here. They are qualities, experiential qualities, and thus they are generated by your brain inside your skull.
By the way, I'm sorry to be interrupting him, but there are non-physicalists who think this as well. So I'm thinking of Adam Pouts as someone in particular, a philosopher who holds the view that the phenomenal property of redness is a representation of some Edenic property, some primitive red, as being out there in the world, and there is no such property out there in the world, as per science, etc. So we represent the world as having this property which is not in the world, and that this representation of this property is itself not a physical representation. This view doesn't necessarily go with physicalism only.
Are the flavors, so are the melodies, the textures, the smells. There is nothing out there that can be visualized. Out there is just pure abstraction. So you need to understand this in order to understand the hard problem. Because the hard problem is precisely how you go from those pure abstractions into the actual qualities of experience. So if you think that there are real qualities out there, you cannot understand the hard problem. You will be blind to it. But that's just a misunderstanding of materialism. There is no.
I mean, I still think you would get something like the hard problem, because I think there's philosophers like Sam Coleman who think that these qualities are somehow fundamental to the nature of the universe, and something like the way panpsychists do, but he thinks they're not mental. He thinks they're proto-mental or something like that, so therefore he can be a physicalist. I'm eventually going to try and get him on Consciousness Live to talk to me about this, but we'll see. So anyway, I don't know. So I think Bernardo's a bit, putting too much on materialism here, but
version of materialism that can be internally consistent, saying that there are fundamental qualities out there and derivative qualities in here. This divide is completely arbitrary. Either qualities are fundamental everywhere, or they are all derivative and they are all inside your head. It's one or the other. But most people who casually would refer to themselves as physicalists do not understand this. And it's surprising. Even people with doctorates in computer science or people close to me, they fall for this. It's quite interesting. So there is a meta problem, but it's not widespread.
So just again to reiterate, this is something that a lot of people fall for, regardless of their views, and some people who are physicalists think this way. Okay, good.
And it's quite limited. And it's a psychological problem, not a philosophical problem.
So I don't think they've addressed the meta problem at all here, as I would understand it. But okay, still interesting.
Okay, perfect. So, and you know what's interesting? This actually ties right into this next question quite well, in particular with the first part of your answer there. So there's what's called the phenomenal concept strategy, as you know. Sometimes they call it the phenomenal cope strategy. It's
Okay, so yeah, phenomenal concept strategy. I've never been a big fan of the phenomenal concept strategy either. I don't necessarily endorse it. I wouldn't call it the phenomenal cope strategy. I think it does make sense. I think that's a weird way to put it, but what are they? So this is not going to be good. Okay.
it's in which they hold that there's only an epistemic, but not an ontological.
Well, now hold on. So one response to this, I forget where I was talking about this, maybe the other day, but the general form of the anti-physicalist arguments all take this form that consciousness is not explainable by science. So therefore, because it's not explainable, then it's not physical. And it's the not explainable part is an epistemic thing. So it may just be that it is what it is, and we can't understand it or know about it or explain it. And there might be, and then you would want to say, well, yeah, but why is that? And so if you thought that, then you would want to try to explain why that was the case. And the phenomenal concepts strategy is one very popular amongst type B physicalists, who I mentioned earlier, way of trying to deal with this. So I already mentioned my preferred way is to think that you can make these a priori deductions once you had the right concepts, but you have to acquire the concepts from experience. So the basic idea of the phenomenal concept strategy agrees with part of what I said. You have to acquire these concepts that you use to think about your own experience from experience. But then they go on to say that these concepts are of a special sort that block you from making these a priori deductions. And I think that's interesting. There's a trillion years of debate on the phenomenal concept strategy. So we'll see what they're going to do. I'm going to actually seeming to me I'm going to have to go pretty soon. Thought I would make it farther than this, but this might be a good place to stop because once the kids get off the bus, then I gotta bounce. Well, let's see. One quick little foray into what he's going to say about this.
Between physics and subjective experience. So what would be your response to the phenomenal concept strategy?
When one is facing a inevitable conceptual contradiction within a system of thought, but one is emotionally committed to that system of thought.
Wait, what? Bernardo, dude. Okay, so there's no contradiction in the system. That's not been shown. Maybe there's a choice that you don't enjoy. Okay. Oh, let me just let him talk. I can already see that I'm not liking where this is going, but let's see how he wraps it up.
But one is emotionally committed to that system of thought. What one does is to start using convoluted conceptual indirections and strategies to cast doubt on the obviousness of that contradiction. And then things like illusionism, eliminativism.
Well, illusionism is different. So phenomenal concept strategy is usually invoked by people who are not illusionists. They think they're phenomenal realists, as I typically understand them. Okay.
And appeals to the epistemic-ontic distinction arise. They are desperate, tortuous attempts to deny obvious contradictions in a certain system of thought, as opposed to backtracking and find.
Wait, did he just literally put the phenomenal concept strategy in the same camp as illusionism and as a coping mechanism?
Appeals to the epistemic-ontic distinction arise. They are desperate, tortuous attempts to deny obvious contradictions in a certain system of thought, as opposed to backtracking and find the assumption that led us astray to begin with. And people do that when they are emotionally committed and even socially committed to a certain perspective. That has happened throughout history. Our time is no exception to that. Look, ultimately, it is a fact that ultimately all we have to construct an ontology is our epistemology. It's all we have. And this is acknowledged as a limitation of human beings. We do not have direct access to reality as it is. We are cooped up in our models of reality, in our theory making, our hypotheses, our conceptual armor, and so forth. So, yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to stop him there. I hear the bus outside, meaning my wife's out there getting them the kids, and then I'm supposed to be wrapping this up. So I want to listen to the rest of this. I disagree with a lot of what Bernardo's saying. I still find his view interesting. That's why I had him on Consciousness Live, and we didn't talk about physicalism at all because I wanted to find out about his views about analytic idealism, which I think are very interesting. But I also think that you would only accept those views if you take a certain approach to the hard problem. I don't think there's a contradiction anywhere or an emotional denial anywhere. So I would dispute that way of putting things. But, just to be clear, I like Bernardo and his work, but I do think that he doesn't take physicalism seriously enough. But more to come, because I see that there's a lot of discussion about illusionism, and they even mention Keith Frankish and stuff. So I do want to watch the rest of this, and I think I'll probably have time to do that tomorrow. So we'll see. All right, cool.